All right, so happy New Year's Eve. We'll be greeting 2025 shortly. I have a festive background here. Okay, so and I really liked what came with my video editor, this kind of creepy Christmas snowman. So I added it to the slides. So we're going to be reviewing again Beyond Stories, but six more stories. And this is on Amazon, and it is also available in an ebook. So let's get started with that. So here's the front, and then also some of the different all of the authors. I'm in here. Okay, I'm not going to get to my story yet. I'm going to review a little bit about each story, and I'm also going to discuss some of my thoughts and provide a little excerpt too. So, the first one, and I apologize again in case I say anyone's names incorrectly. So, the first story I'll review is The OS by Jashae Slaughter. Givtarin in the Field by Brie-Anna Schaffer. Sand Memories by James Kenwood. Alligator by Brie-Anna Schaffer. Monotony by Kathrine Elaine. And Eraser by Alexander Semenyuk. And I'm also going to talk a bit about a workshop that I'm running with Scott Perry, where we'll be hanging out with people and discussing diversify income next steps. So we'll get to that. All right, so The OS by Jashae Slaughter. I was immediately drawn into this story of Ethan's feelings of loss, confusion, and the sinking dread that can unfold, and that was pretty relatable. I connected deeply with his experience, and I also sensed subtle dynamics of power and control in the relationship that added complexity to the narrative. The slow burn of the story is fantastic. It keeps you hooked without rushing to an emotional buildup. It reminds me of that I watch and play a lot of different games. I watch a lot of movies and shows, and some of this reminded me of No Rest for the Wicked, which is a supernatural episode. Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things. That's another supernatural episode, as well as Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid. Plaid is a big thing in the supernatural show, though there wasn't plaid in the story that I recall. Anyway, my mind kind of jumps to different stories that my mind just kind of connects to. So those were some of them. And I also wanted to note I do miss supernatural. Anyway, back to this. It also reminded me of a movie called Pulse from 1988 that has Joey Lawrence in it when he was a kiddo. And also Chappie, the movie from 2015, in exploring uploaded consciousnesses. Consciousness? I don't know. Okay. As I read, I found myself silently yelling at Ethan to pay attention to his gut feeling. One line in particular stood out. A strange undercurrent hummed in the air. And that was the piece that brought my mind to Pulse, that movie. And the eerie vibe of that film seemed to hum along with the atmosphere of this scene. And then there was another excerpt. You're going to love this, she said, a playful spark in her eyes. My famous chicken Alfredo, but with a twist. Ethan leaned against the counter, watching her every move. A twist, huh? It was perfect before, but I'll bite. Sophia smirked. Hey, I'm not just your regular old wife anymore. I've been rebooted, remember? The joke made him chuckle, even if it still carried a strange weight he couldn't quite unpack. He pushed that feeling aside. This was their moment, and he wouldn't ruin it with his doubts. They sat down to eat, and Sophia reached across the table to take his hand. Her touch was warm and familiar, as if no time had passed. "I've missed this," she said quietly. Ethan swallowed hard. "Me too." He squeezed her hand and smiled, trying to show how much he meant it. Later, they snuggled on the couch with a bottle of wine, a rom-com playing softly in the background. Sophia rested against Ethan's chest, tracing lazy circles on his arm. "Remember the first time we watched this?" she asked softly. Ethan grinned. "Vividly. You spent half the movie on the phone with your mom, so we had to watch it twice." Sophia laughed, tilting her head up to meet his eyes. "You were so annoyed." "Mildly inconvenienced, I think is the phrase you're looking for." She rolled her eyes. "You're lucky I'm charming." He kissed the top of her head, holding her closer. For the first time in a while, the tightness in his chest began to loosen. Here, Ethan and Sophia share what seems like a rom-com moment, but with some sci-fi elements. They're snuggling on the couch, enjoying a bottle of wine and reminiscing about their history. Yet the backdrop of their connection feels layered with unspoken tension. I had a question. Where do you find a guy who genuinely enjoys rom-coms? Personally, sometimes I get bored with some of the traditional rom-coms myself. I prefer films like The Lake House, where it is a rom-com in some ways, but there's a supernatural twist to it. So I like those kind, which add some depth. And this story, it definitely adds some depth as well. It's a genre mashup that keeps you emotionally engaged while still delivering unexpected twists, and I really liked that. All right, so let's move on to the next story. And again, my apologies if I'm saying these words incorrectly. Giftaren in the Field by Bertine Schaefer, or Schaffer. Schaefer? This story had me hooked from the start, especially with its Star Trek-esque undertone, with the statement, "Observe, not interfere." At first, I wondered if the characters might be an alien species, particularly with their habit of sniffing things, which felt intriguingly otherworldly. And as the characters enter a council room, my thoughts shifted to the Hammerites with Thief 2. This scene reminded me of some of the prior work meetings that I was required to attend in the past that seemed unnecessary, and yet the bosses said they were necessary. I couldn't help but feel for Giftarin enduring what seemed like a bureaucratic marathon. The meeting stretched on, and at the 3-hour mark, a community member finally speaks. And what they reveal is shocking, but before they can fully express their concerns, they're abruptly silenced. My immediate thought was, they need a lawyer. And then that kind of made me think of the show Burden of Truth at that point. The intrigue around who or what these characters were, they kept me eagerly turning the pages and trying to figure it out. And that's another sign of a good story where your brain is trying to, as my coach calls it, close the loop, trying to understand. But if you're able to kind of keep that loop open, meaning if the author is able to keep our loops open so we keep thinking about the story afterwards, I think that's also a good sign of a good story. But again, I'm a newbie with reviewing these things, but I do uh, absorb a lot of stories and have since I was a child. So I guess you could say I'm an expert on absorbing stories. Okay, let's see here. So I'm going to read a little excerpt. Okay. You can't fight city council, but you can watch it eat itself alive. Kathrine stepped warily into the cool passageway. She was early, she knew that, but she also knew that it was best that way. This was new terrain for her, but the rules were the same as always. Stay low, stay downwind, don't make eye contact, and always, always remember that you are here to observe, not to interfere. There was a doorway at the end of the corridor, frosted glass, gold lettering. She stopped, sniffed the air, and frowned. A new scent, layered on top of the light aroma of oak, leather-bound books, and cleaning fluid. Could it be fear? Her heart pounded just a little as she pushed open the door. Before her lay a narrow table, and next to it the thin, boxy frame of a metal detector. She knew what to do. Don't make eye contact, she reminded herself as she placed her purse on the table and a uniformed guard scurried over to sniff it. The guard looked up at her and nodded. Evening, miss, he said with a smile. Show them your teeth, she reminded herself of something she had heard once, in a lecture perhaps. They like it when you show your teeth, and she smiled back. When she had passed through the metal detector, another guard handed her her purse. Have a good evening, he said to her. She smiled and said, you too. She pushed through the next door and entered the chamber. Also with this, Kathrine in the field, you can definitely, you know, uh, just reflecting on that excerpt I just read, you can kind of feel yourself stepping into this character, but also not knowing who they are or exactly what they are because they're sniffing something. So, like I said, there's some kind of otherworldly characteristics. And then there's definitely some tension later and some interesting plot twists that help move the story along. And it was very interesting, very entertaining. But yes, let's move on to the next story. Sand Memories by James Kenwood. So I will kick this off with an excerpt that immediately drew me in. We were on the smaller moon of Antigen when we found the liminal sand. It was an accident more than anything else. We had deployed at Hayden Ridge, far to the west of the actual target, and had to hike in to get to the gray base on the shoreline. 400 miles across country to avoid their sensors, and those weird algae towers that they grew everywhere. It was supposed to be a simple trek. 8 hours in, hit them hard, then pull back and wait for the lifters to recover us. Nothing about it was simple once we found the sand. Sunset had been 2 hours ago. Planet set had been 10 minutes ago. The fat blue bulk of Antigen sliding down into the northern horizon and driving the last of the light away from the landscape. Except the landscape did not go dark. Parts of it did, sure. The mesas to the north glowed blue and purple for a few minutes after planet set. Strange auroras that blended sky and land into a radiation swirl and then went dark too. The rest of the land was a crooked maze of rocks and dunes, iron oxide red during the day, dull and flat now. Our mechs left black, ankle-deep footprints as we followed the navigation beacons east, and nothing moved except us. No plants, no native life, nothing to indicate that there was anything here except our iron beasts. So this, and let me just look at my other slide here. Yeah. Sometimes I just wing it with these, so I'm like, what did I put here? Okay, so insights and possible references. So some key themes was the immersive setting, the glowing mesas, the alien moons that made me think of sci-fi classics like Star Trek, Stargate. Halcyon, I wasn't sure what that was. Is that, and did I read that part? Yeah, there was, I don't know if I read that part, but the character referred to Halcyon, and I'm not sure if that was like, I mean, it sounds like it was the mech, that they were using, which I guess the mech may have been like some sort of, I think they called it, yeah, an Iron Beast. So was it an AI, a mech, or something else, or something more? The sand was eerie, and that made me, for some reason, think of Dune and Tremors. Well, Dune, because I mean, the whole planet is filled with sand, and then there are little creatures, well, not creatures, huge creatures actually. And then in Tremors, my mind just kind of jumped there like, whoa, is something going to jump out of the sand? Because I think the character was talking about the sand was almost like moving. So this too reminded me of other sci-fi stories as well, like Jurassic Park and World, because of the thrilling adventures and the unknown territories. Also, The Oath by Frank Peretti, because my mind just jumped to, I wonder if there's a monster or something. And then it also reminded me of Orville as well, though I can't pinpoint exactly which episode. But I think this author does a really great job of making us wonder what's going to happen. Is there a creature? Is there not? A lot of unknown elements that our brains try to close a loop, but the loop won't close. So it definitely keeps us eager to keep reading. Oh, yes, and Stargate, it reminded me of that because there was an episode, and I can't remember which one, but they walked through the Stargate and they end up in this interesting place with eerie looking sand and elements, and it kind of made my mind connect there too. You know, I wish I had, oh, yes, I did. My GPT helped me build this. That wasn't exactly what the Stargate episode looked like, but It I think it did have some interesting little, I don't even know what to call those blue structures, but they were tiny, and I think it was like an entity, and but anyway, the story is its own unique thing. Alright, so another story by Bratine Schaffer called Alligator. Some different themes here were the parental instinct versus professional advice. So as we're joining the character in facing difficulties, I definitely feel for the character that there's a conflict with the gut reaction versus trusting the doctor. I think this is also a satirical take on medicine, and it points to some of the absurdity of overdiagnoses and unnecessary treatments in some cases. And I think it's also relatable to modern fears of navigating a complex healthcare system. So let's jump to the excerpt. A feeling of unease sat someplace between Nicole's sternum and her lower belly. If she tried to ignore it, it just welled up all the more and fired off little adrenaline missiles to her heart and brain. The missiles were meant to warn her, she felt, but of what? Inside the car, it felt quiet and safe. Outside, rain pelted down against the windows, and the color of nearby traffic lights and neon signs ran down the glass in the rivulets before her eyes. In rivulets before her eyes. Adam sat quietly at the wheel, and in the back seat, baby Abigail dozed in her carrier. Little Petal, they called her, or sometimes Blossom. They had noticed early on, being barely a few months ago, that her pink little fingers were precisely the color of the petals of apple blossoms, hence the sobriquets. Sobriquets? Sobriquets. I'm not sure if I said that word correctly. Like I said, I connected really well as later on the character faces some difficulties with what what to do, Googling symptoms, the doctor saying things that dismiss the parents' views or their opinions. There were times I felt a lot of anger at the doctor as I was reading it. And as I was reading too, it was clear that there was some satire going on, which I think was very, very interesting. So there was a memorable excerpt. Essentially, the idea is to use the sand mite's natural predators to eliminate it from the household, dot, dot, dot. And as you read the story, a question to think about is, how does the story reflect real world frustrations with healthcare? Like I said, it was very relatable. It was like a roller coaster, a mix of relatable frustration, anger, and a wild twist of parody that left me very entertained. It's a bold imagining on medical practices that makes you laugh, reflect, and maybe even yell at your book a little. Okay, so for this one too, I usually, in most of my posts and most of my advertisements, I make my own memes, but I was running out of time. I just don't have time to search through all the different options. So I asked my GPT to create a meme that described some of my notes. So it drew this, which makes me think of Batman's Joker a little bit too. Um, anyway, let's move on. Next story is Monotony by Kathrine Elaine. The story starts with an all too relatable depiction of modern life's monotony, painting Elliot as a participant in the rat race of endless repetition. His disillusionment with the cycle of life, work, paycheck, fleeting pleasures, repeat, is a strong commentary on how many feel stuck in routine. I think any of us can relate to that. I felt stuck like that before. So an excerpt that resonated. The passage of time had lost its meaning. He was just a particle of a giant creature, a blob of 1,000 heads moving from their apartment blocks into the train, dissolving between the stations, then gathering back into one. A monster of thousand tired limbs, or a centipede dragging its feet back to the dark slums of the city that birthed it. So this vivid description mirrors, in my mind, Stranger Things in season 3, I think, with the blob-like creature that is merged of multiple humans. It is a very gross. It's just very gross. And the metaphor emphasizes, I think, Elliot's detachment and lack of individuality, or lack of feeling individual in a crowd. Also, the lack of feeling like one has control over their life. Another excerpt: his life was a cycle of exhausted existence. His only remedy had been video games, Friday nights at the pub, one night stands. But even these tiny drops of pleasure became automatic, predictable, ever circling hours of his monotonous life. Nightly pleasures turned into hangover ridden mornings, the void inside his chest spreading like an invisible cancer, a black hole devouring every ray of light, every joy he had ever felt. It almost sounds like a black hole in a way there. That was my insert. Elliot was sick of it all, hiding inside the bright screen and moving onward with the train crowd. All was the same: dark hooded, sexless people staring at their screens, their faces ghastly, oblivious. They were all sick. So that was really well written with the descriptions. It sounds very poetic. There's also looking at the escapism with technology. And I asked AI to help me to build another picture, and I thought it did a pretty good job of people staring at their phones. I wasn't sure what this stuff is at the bottom of the, I guess, train, but the GPT said it's uh, reminiscent of the other worldly pieces and the grotesqueness. And I was like, okay, whatever. The descriptions definitely created an unsettling mood, gradually shifting from the mundane to the horrific, with potential hallucinations. That reminded me of there's this fan mission, I believe it's the night at the Roxburgh. It's a Thief 2 fan mission, which it just reminded me of one piece of the book. You'd have to read it to understand. You probably have to play the game too. But anyway, there's some very interesting pieces to this. I also just heard that I think in January on one day, I'm not sure which one, people across the world are turning off their screens for one day. And then I thought to myself, can any of us imagine a screen having no screens for a whole day? And then I was watching Terra Nova, an episode, and the girl on the show was talking about she didn't have access to her tablet or whatever she had for a day. Just interesting coincidences. Did ask the GPT to draw the scene. Oh, and when I looked at the picture that the GPT that it drew, it reminded me of a scene in the Wheel of Time book series. I think it's The Eye of the World, where Rand is passing through the ways with some of the other characters, and learning about the Black Wind evoked kind of a similar thought of that picture. It made my mind kind of connect with that. All right, so the final story of this piece of my review, I have one more review I need to do after this. Another whole, I still need to read the rest of the books. Eraser by Alexander Semenyuk. This one was also very good. It was only 3 pages, but the 3 pages were dynamic. They immediately drew me in. With emotion, the fear of one's mind being taken over, it reminded me of a Stargate episode called The Fifth Race, which was season 2, episode 15, where Jack O'Neill accidentally activates an ancient device that was created by the ancients, the Asgard. This also reminded me of some of the fear that I've noticed in the world at different times where unknowns are happening. So I think we can really connect with the story. So here's an excerpt. Out of all the horrors in the world, can there be anything more terrifying than destruction of your mind to the point where you do not recognize those that love you? You do not remember your life's most precious and loving moments. You no longer possess real knowledge of who you are. It's all erased, which is exactly what he could do, the man who touched one deep secret of cosmos. His own mind was twirled and destroyed by incomprehensible knowledge and secrets of the universe, too heavy for a human tied down inside their earthly body. However, he gained an ability to take from others their emotions, memories, to distort their minds as he searched to find his own again. This story, you feel a punch of raw emotion, and you connect with it with understanding some existential types of things as well. So, a question for you is, what comes to your mind as you're reading Eraser? And what do you notice? So, now to writing as a side hustle, some more tips on that. So, an idea is to try to set your own deadlines, and especially for neurodivergent people, we can get distracted, or other things going on around us can draw our attention. So, having a deadline that we've set, writing things down, connecting our hand to paper, making lists that we review over and over can help us with completing those deadlines. And I set my own deadline and kind of added a promise of doing this clarity and creativity blog for 12 days. I had the idea because of the 12 days of Christmas, and I thought, well, how can I, kind of expand on that? So I built the 12 days of clarity and creativity. And I am using my GPT as an editor because sometimes I, write things that maybe it doesn't make sense to the other person. So it can kind of help with rewording some things and editing, but the ideas are mine. And then regarding creativity and writing, which is a form of diversifying income, so this Thursday, January 2nd, 2025 at 11 a.m., I and Scott Perry are going to be hosting a Diversify Income Hangout. So we'll be available for some Q&A with identifying income streams, diversifying income streams beyond the private practice. I know many of us are therapists or helpers or psychologists, psychiatrists who may at times feel stuck in one particular area with income. So we're going to talk about alternative streams of income and some practical steps forward to starting that or building that and getting moving a bit. So also with attending this, there are some free gifts. So you'll have access to the 12 days of clarity and creativity, the paywalled pieces, because I'll also be giving you 30 days free of my blog, which is there are parts that are paywalled. So you'll get access to both of those things. So that includes past workshops, that I have a starting your private practice course that's available on there. That's paywalled. Other workshops, after 3 months, all of my stuff is paywalled, so you'll be able to read all of that. And if you ever have trouble accessing different parts of my blog, just reach out to me. I do have a table of contents too, which should guide you. So this is also for creatives and business nerds. So it's not just for private practice owners, it's for anyone who wants to diversify income streams. So join us. We're going to be meeting on Microsoft Teams. There's a sign up in Teams to be able to get that link to attend. So definitely click it and register. All right. So I think that's about that for that piece. Also, you can join one of our communities. They are all mostly free. Business for Nerds community on Facebook, that's free. Substack, I mostly post in the chat a lot of free content. And then on Telegram too, I also post a lot of free content. So join us in one of those to hang out and talk about nerding out in business and diversifying income. And here are some of my references. I referenced a number of different shows that these writers and their content reminded me of. So here's one page. Here's some more. And also here is our Amazon link. And the title of it, it's listed under Alexander Semenyuk's Amazon page. So Beyond Stories, the anthology of sci-fi and horror. So there's that. And then here are the last of my references. All right, so that's all I have. So I wish you all a happy new year. I hope it's filled with wonderfulness and just prosperity and connection and all the good things. And as always, stay nerdy, and I'll see you next time. Bye.